Alrighty, welcome back. So we'll go ahead and pick up where we left off, and we will begin our discussion on references. So what a reference is going to do is it's going to create an alias or a nickname for an object. We can do this by essentially binding a name, such as II, to an already existing integer object, such as I. So we go ahead and set up that initial object into I is equal to 4. Now we would like to introduce an alias or nickname for the object I. To do this, we're going to bind a reference named II to I. So here's the declaration. II is a reference to an integer object. In other words, II is going to be bound to, so it will be another name for an integer object. And the object to which this reference will be bound is going to be I. So at this point, II and I are names for the same object out there in memory. This one right here. That means if you were to write something like II plus equals 1 and write out I, you would see in that case 8. Irrespective if you're accessing this object through the name I or the name II. For instance, my first name's Michael. Mike is a common nickname for Michael. A lot of my friends from undergrad call me Mike. That's the name I went by then. Michael and Mike refer in this case to the same person, me. Just like I and II refer to the same object, in this case, the one at that address. So it's just think about these as a nickname. The syntax looks a little funny. There's this ampersand, but all that's saying is reference. So we could also create a constant reference, a name that will provide only read-only access to a particular object. We'll see the utility of this when we begin talking about pass by reference to functions. But let's say I have some object I initialized with 4. So that lives somewhere out there in memory, has some sort of address. Its name is I. I can say that II is going to be a reference to an integer object that's constant. In this case, II will refer to this object. However, it's been labeled as const, meaning you can read that object for which they're both a name. However, if you attempted to do something like II plus equals 1, that would be a compilation error. Why? The name II, although referring to the same object as I, can only access that object in a read-only manner. It could be like, file directories, let's say on your computer. Different You can provide read access to some memory. You can provide read and write access to memory. In this case, to that same piece of memory. So in this case, we only have read access through the reference. A couple of kind of caveats with respect to references. A reference cannot be rebound to some other object. Because of this, all references must be initialized. So when we're talking about, if this was a pointer, this would be completely valid, but it's not. It's a reference. A reference, you have to specify the binding at the point of declaration, because this name from that point forward becomes a nickname or alias for the object to which it's bound. So if you forget to do that, you're going to receive a compilation error. If you attempt to bind, say, a reference to a literal, you will also observe a compilation error. However, we will be allowed to take a reference to const to, say, an integer literal value, and more on this later. So this would not be okay this would compile just fine. And we'll see that this is actually very helpful when we begin talking again about passing arguments to functions by reference. So hopefully that short introduction to references was sufficient. I mean, again, remember, you have some sort of object, say string Michael, initialized with, I don't know, my name. We could have a reference and bind that to that object. At this point, Mike and Michael are both names for the same object, just like we had double. Let's call it Z equals 3.14. Let's call it double ref Z. Don't forget the ampersand and bind it to Z. At this point, ref Z and Z are, again, names for the same object. Because they refer to the same object, mutating that object through one or the other, you'd observe the change in the other object. Again, it's just a nickname for the same thing.